priorities, what ought to be considered. Long-term goals, short-term goals. Obviously, the strategic planning and visioning process has a time frame of anywhere from 12 months to 5 years in it. And then again, the rest of these steps go back to staff to be able to receive that direction and prepare a budget that might include or consider some of the issues. Put a slightly different way, this is a fairly lengthy process. You can see in this slide, we're really talking about vision and mission and how it really feeds all the way down into resource allocation. At the top, I'll go back up here, organizational scorecard, community strategic plan, and comprehensive plan all feed into what staff would give you as departments. In this case, it'd be business plans or work plans. It's really the start of that conversation then. As they look at their environments, you've established the goals. As they look at their environments and how they relate to those goals, what input can they give you from strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, environmental review of what the environment says right now. That work plan, as they submit those work plans, is really the centerpiece of that discussion. Department initiatives, and then we talk about measures and targets. Really talk about how do they know, or how do you know, that you're achieving what you want to achieve in the time frame you've been given. These departments' business plans obviously roll down into the programs that serve each department. In some entities, it goes all the way down into the employee scorecards. Their evaluation is based on how well that performance is toward a certain goal or toward a certain program's performance. Resource allocation, after the resources are gathered, we know how much that forecast in the general fund might look like we have. We talk about then how do we divide that up amongst the priorities. And that's really where some of this discussion comes in for the summer budget process. After that debate or that discussion has taken place on some of those tactics, they get fed right back up into the programs, what adjustments need to be made based on what was presented to you in that budget. And once those adjustments are made, we can start performing or monitoring that performance. So as the year progresses, how have we performed on certain goals that might be out there? Maintenance of infrastructure. If there's so many roads that need to be repaved, how are we working toward that goal? Some of that feedback loop on performance measurements or metrics, again, can be the direction finders. 2 years later, you get that direction finder back. Is it still a priority? Do you see traffic flow east to west or north to south of the city improving? How is communications to the citizens looking after the implementation of, say, a newsletter? Is it something that we're making active performance on? This is a long process. This is a long process that can take a timeline from January to December. Understand you guys are not in the middle of budget, but from a staff perspective, we're in April, which means the calendar here is where you see that March/April directions to staff. This is really where you're at. January, February stakeholder input is an ideal place to start, retreat, or a strategic discussion on long-term or short-term goals. Typically happens really early in the process. In this case, the information you get tonight can lend itself to how much can we get done, what does the focus of this budget need to look like. And then obviously July and August is really when you're adopting the budget, August 25th with a deadline. And then again, December, January, you're monitoring the results. This is where the work plans come back. How do the departments perform? They'll remeasure some of that, bring it back to you, and start the loop all over again. So as far as a calendar is concerned, as a high level, this is what it might look like. This is probably different than what other entities do when it comes to debating what a line item budget might look like. Gathering the stakeholder input is obviously a key step in kicking off this budget. In the past, Direction Finders has done a great job in stepping through a lot of those priorities that a citizen can have. So I want to pause here and just get your feedback. And if there's any questions, otherwise I can move on, but if you get any questions on any of the process before we move forward. Okay. Given that, let's dive into goal setting. Like I said before, goal setting really isn't talking about what your goals are. It's really here is talking about how do you get to that decision level? How do you make those decisions on what those goals might look like? We understand that times have changed. On a national or local level, pressure's been put on local governments to perform more. As federal budgets get cut, state budget get cut, some of the expectations fall to the local level. Then the number one question these days is, what about the citizen expectation? Can we actually do everything that they expect to get done, given the limited resources we have? There's typically more good to be done than there's resources to do them. It's almost a moral question, if you would. There's always more good to be done within a budget, and that's that reluctance to invest. Then there will be resources to do them. Citizens' expectations, let's talk about that for a minute. Do we know what they expect? With the Direction Finders, it does delineate it fairly clear on what that expectation might look like, what the priorities might look like. Have we been providing the same services for 10 years? And if we do, why? Is it still relevant today? What's the environment look like? Are they services that we should be providing, or the services that citizens think we should be providing? So are they imperative? Are they core services, in other words? What about the levels? Are they too much? Are they too little? Have we adjusted those? What if the levels of service we are providing are not meeting our citizens' expectation? Are they meeting our own expectation? Some of these questions, if not all of these questions, are typically not involved in an annual budget process. They need to be, but they're not. When it comes to stakeholder input, we talked about focus groups in March, we talked about Direction Finders, we talked about various surveys that could obtain a lot of this information. But why do you need to obtain it from a citizen? Obviously, with a third of the city's revenue in the general fund coming from property tax, it's important. Utility charges, user fee and utility charges. I know utility charges, I want to say it's around $14 million. It's a fairly significant number within the city of Gardner. Assessments and other revenues, they all come from that citizen. And when I say citizen, it's the resident as well as the commercial enterprise. And then, obviously, the message here is that governments can't do everything for citizens. They need to get involved. When it comes to priority setting, when it comes to some of those goals, what do they see as the priority? Because everything can't be a priority or nothing will get done. So determining those priorities. Once you do understand what the priorities are, take Direction Finders, for example, how do you go through a process? Typically either in a retreat or some type of strategic discussion process that says what are the board, what are the governing body's priorities, and then contrast that a lot of times with the department directors as they see the environment out there from a professional perspective. A lot of times they'll match, sometimes they won't, but at the end of the day, it's going to end up being your job, your responsibility to set some of those goals and have that, receive that information, obviously, and be able to have that dialogue with staff about what those priorities you see, as you see them needing to be accomplished. And then in some instances, citizens prioritize the programs. There's been exercises done where neighborhood meetings have been capitalized upon, setting certain areas of the government up on a wall, giving them a certain number of monopoly dollars and seeing how they allocate those dollars as an input you can have as to maybe there's something you didn't think about. I know there's an anecdote that on a community center where the community focus ended up being we have to have a community center, but when we took a look at the senior high school class, we had them allocate the same dollars. They didn't allocate it toward the community center. All the adults did, but the kids didn't. When we asked the kids why, they said, well, my mom and dad can afford to send me to a private private health club, or I can join 24-hour fitness, or I can join something else. Well, that morphed the community center into something a little more community focused. It still had the health regimens, but it had more of a community feel, a community atmosphere. It's